Hi, this is Steve Harper from yourcreativelife.com, continuing my series of videos about how to create a script to go from idea to fully finished script. And we are in the third part of that series. If you haven't seen the first two, go back and watch those two videos now in order to catch up, because we're moving ahead into plot points and talking about cards and how cards will help you build your story. So we started out, if you watch those first two videos, talking about this idea about deviled eggs that quickly became about two characters, one who's pro-deviled eggs called Horace and one who's anti-deviled eggs called Joan. We went from there to our logline, which describes this opposition in a dramatic way, choosing Horace to be the lead character, and Joan is the opposition. And we put together a one-sentence description of this overarching story that we want to tell. That logline is, this is a story of Horace, a brilliant, nerdy, low-level government employee who is trying to create a side business making and selling deviled eggs in spite of the fact that it's illegal to make them, and his social climbing by the book supervisor, Joan, wants to destroy the eggs and see Horace jailed for his efforts. So that's certainly a mouthful, but it describes what we're up against and who our main character is. So from that point, you can see how the one-sentenceness of that particular rendition of what this is gives us some very clear things. We know who we're following. Horace is our main character. We know what the conflict is. So now what do we do? Well, in the book Screenplay by Sid Field, which is one of my favorite books about screenwriting and writing, I think, in general, he talks about a notion of structure that I really like to use. Now, there are many different notions of structure. This is not necessarily the only thing you might do, but it certainly is a method to building a story. So Sid talks about how we know every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? Beginning, middle, and end. And Sid says there are things that he calls plot points, which are basically hinges in the story, the thing that takes the beginning and unites it to the middle, and then a thing that takes the middle and connects it to the end, right? So they're sort of hinges in the script, in the story. And if you imagine, you can take a look at his book, but if you imagine a line going across my screen here, and 1/4 through that line is this little dot that we're going to call plot point 1, right? So this is our story. We get to plot point 1. And then in the middle, we're going to have this space of conflict, which we're going to talk about is twice as long as the beginning by Sid's math. We've got this period of conflict and then another plot point, another moment that's going to send it toward a resolution. And this piece is as long as the first piece, right? So you got a piece on the beginning, a piece on the end, and a conflict that's twice as long in the middle. I hope you can follow that. So Sid says we need to know what those moments are that are the hinges to this story. And Sid describes plot points, and I think this is really useful, as an event that spins the story in a new direction. An event that spins the story in a new direction. And in this case, it's going to send us into the conflict, into that middle portion. So let's say our story begins, and randomly, just to give you an example, of all the stuff we need to know about the life of Horace, right? He's going to get to some point where the story's going to change. Now, we know from our logline that the antagonist is Joan, and that she's got a plan to screw up Horace's vision about this side hustle that he has. So for me, and you know, your mileage may vary, but for me, that seems like a significant moment that perhaps we can say is the first plot point, right? Maybe there's a thing that makes Joan decide to go against Horace, you know? Perhaps since Horace is our protagonist and maybe we want to link it to him, Horace gets really angry at Joan, and then, perhaps from that, she begins to sort of have this vendetta out against him. I don't know exactly what it is, but some moment that comes about because of Horace, or alternately because of Joan, but the Joan thing seems a little random because our story is about Horace. So something that happens based on Horace sends us into this conflict. So let's say Horace gets really angry with Joan at work, and immediately it changes everything because now she's out to get him, right? And that's going to lead us into this whole section that's conflict, 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 conflict. So one plot point is Horace gets really mad at Joan at work, right? Whatever it is, curses her out, yells at her, whatever that event is that spins the story in a new direction, that's our plot point one. Now, we're going to go through, and of course, she's going to try to be getting him into jail. So Joan is dead set on getting Horace into jail as a result of this event. Now, we're going to go through conflict, right? She's chasing him, he's hiding, whatever that looks like, I don't know. But we're going to get to another point at the end of the conflict where, something will change and spin the story in another new direction. And here I'm going to make up that if she wants to get him in jail, because these two pieces always are mirrors of each other in some way. So Joan is dead set on getting Horace caught and in jail. Let's say the plot point two is she succeeds. Horace lands in jail. Right? Now, that's not the end of our story because Horace is probably going to triumph in some way. Maybe Joan will have a change of heart. I don't know. But now I know I have these two moments in my script. Horace gets angry with Joan and she declares revenge. Joan succeeds in getting Horace in jail, right? So if I have these two plot points, what I like to do is I like to write those. First, I'll do that little graph, right? So I can see them with these two little dots, and I might write above each dot what those two sentences are, those plot points, those events that spin the story in a new direction. And once I have those events, then I'll pull out some index cards and I'll begin to figure out what the story is. And what I mean by that is it's logical if Joan is going to set out to have revenge against Horace, there's a certain amount of things, certain number of things that I need to do as a writer to introduce you to the world we're in, the world of deviled eggs, the world of how Joan works, the world of where Horace works, the world of like the relationship they have, whatever else I need to, right? And so what I'm going to do with index cards is the first thing is I'm going to write each of these plot points on a single index card, right? And then I'm going to say how many events need to happen before that main first plot point event. And I'm just going to write down index cards. Horace comes to work, just off the top of my head. Horace comes to work. Horace, talks to Joan, his supervisor. Horace talks to his best friend. Whatever I feel like needs to be introduced, I'm just writing these things down. And I can be really loose about it because I'm going to go back later and clean it all up. But I'm just going to card, 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 card. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the middle. Once she's on his tail, what are the things that I think need to happen? And I just begin to do cards, right? And of course, there's some art to it. I might want to set up some stuff and he gets away and they argue or he hides or whatever it is. But I'm just writing those things down. And eventually I have all of these cards that take me from the beginning to the middle, to that plot point, through the middle, to the next plot point, and to the end, right? Once I have that, I'm ready to move on to taking those cards after I've sifted through them and decided what I like and what I don't like, what's better and what's worse. And I may take days or weeks or even months to do this. And then when I feel good about my story, I'm going to write it down in an outline. We're going to talk about outlines in the next part 4. But for now, we're going to bring an end to part 3. So what we've done today is talked about the logline again, talked about the 2 plot points, and began to create cards to go from the beginning to the first plot point, through the conflict, to the second plot point, and to the end. And we are well on our way to creating a script based on this idea. So like and subscribe for this video and for this YouTube page. Really glad you're here. You can check out all sorts of free information and other things about the coaching that I do for writers at yourcreativelife.com. And please check out the Secret Writer Podcast, which is a brand new offering that is really fun. We kind of jokingly call it therapy for writers, with me and Nick Job, who is a friend of mine and also a really, really excellent writing coach. Take a look at the other videos on this site, and I'll see you next time.